a property that is a straight office building means that there isn't the activity on the front part. I've gone into that a little bit. There isn't the activity, and it's a unique situation. If you look at the tax map of this property, I mean, you see a fairly ample parking area behind this building, and there's no direct entrance from the property to that back parking, which I think is actually a plus. The CEO of the tour agency is here and can certainly address the whether the fact that the deeded access over that property is a problem. I suspect it'll be less of a problem with the group home than it would be with a full-scale office use, because there just won't be as many cars. So the deeded access is a special feature. This is the second largest lot on the north side of School Street. The interior contains, it's either 10 or 12 office rooms. There's a fairly sizable kitchen in the office part, but it's not functional. There's a refrigerator there. I didn't open it, but so there's the 7 bathrooms I think is a special feature. Not necessarily a good special feature, but it's a special feature of this property. The wraparound porch is extensive. A lot of these properties have some level of porch, but this is a broad and a large porch that I think helps quite a bit. And to reiterate, 7,000 square foot space. I think it's more like 6,600. So no fair and substantial relationship exists between the general public purposes of the ordinance and the specific application of that provision. So the general public purpose, I'll reiterate those, and the specific application is this proposal. And how does that relate to as whether there is a fair and substantial relationship that exists between those two things. And I want to first tell you, reiterate that the purpose of this transitional district is to accommodate a variety of residential, open space, and other low-intensity uses in a mixed-use environment of attached and detached structures. What I think is interesting there that it does say mixed use, but multifamily is allowed in the transitional district. Offices are allowed. A funeral home is allowed, and a bed and breakfast is permitted. So, and then by special exception, community center, cultural facility, daycare is allowed by special exception, and as is a senior center. So this type of use would be appropriate in that context, I think. The master plan is another aspect of what's the overall purpose and whether or not this would be a fitting use. The master plan states, while some base the definition of diversity solely on race or ethnicity, the concept is much more tied to acceptance and respect. It means understanding individual differences and exploring these differences in a safe, positive, and nurturing environment. It is about moving beyond simple tolerance to embracing and celebrating diversity's many dimensions throughout our community. It has been my observation that the city holds itself out as a welcoming and affirming community, and that is certainly what the master plan calls for. So the combination of the land use purpose and the diversity purpose in the master plan, I think, are aspects that this use will be a good fit for. I want to read the exchange that I had with the Realtor as it relates to the hardship standard. And I had asked her to characterize the interest of prospective buyers in this property. And in particular, what was their interest to continue to use it as an office. And this was her email. There has not been one single inquiry by a prospective buyer interested in the property for office space. The days of need for a professional office space appear to be gone. Several developers have considered the property for multifamily conversion with the intention to maximize possible number of units. You have your variance comment, Mr. Chair, which I'm aware of. All inquiries have been for conversion to residential or multi-conversion. None of these interested parties have moved forward because the costs of conversion are grossly prohibitive. The concept of a hardship relating to the existing residence itself, the existing building itself, is an aspect of hardship that this board has affirmed before. People in this audience are very familiar with it. It's one case that made it to the Supreme Court. Clearly, the board thought that the property, and I'm talking about the Farr versus the City of Keene case, the property on Winter Street, clearly the board felt that it was a fair indicator of unnecessary hardship where the square footage is so large that it's not conducive to a single-family home, whereas it has to be used for some other use. And I suggest in this situation we're dealing with a condition where the size is not conducive to single-family, the cost is not conducive to multifamily, and the market, which is becoming fairly well established, does not indicate that office space is going to be a likely outcome for this property. So something like the use that we're proposing is necessary to handle that. And with respect to the comments that I made concerning the Realtor, she did send me an email letter that I submitted today, that you have that in your packet. It's very short, and I've given you more than what the letter says already. Just give me a second here, and I'll think I'm... I'm not going to go into the details of why I think it's a reasonable use, the second part of the hardship thing. I think I've alluded to that without actually giving you the criterion that I was addressing, but glad to answer any questions.
Thank you. Who has questions? Joe, you got one?
I have a bunch, but I have to get my bearings straight here.
Okay.
Mr. Hanna, let me turn on my microphone. I'm not seeing how the special conditions of the property tie to the general public purposes you just elaborated on in terms of the master plan, the diversity, and the intent of the particular zone in question. I understand what you're saying, I just don't see how they tie together. And I was flipping through the book here to find the definition of downtown transition. because you've mentioned the area is intended to accommodate a variety of residential, open space, and other low-intensity uses in a mixed-use environment of attached and detached structures. I think we agree that this would be accommodating 12 people, client residents, you've called them, in a residential building that would not be multifamily in a sense of it divided up into individual units.
That's right.
Okay. I'm just having a hard time grasping the connection of the special conditions of a very large interior, separate access through an easement, which I get, that's from the tourism place. The number of bathrooms, the square footage of the building, and how that ties to, how it makes it unfair to apply the zoning ordinance to this land, given the public purposes you just mentioned.
Well, one of the public purposes is to provide a transitional zoning district with mixed uses.
Correct.
And this would be a mixed use, or would be a use that is not the typical residence, but is also not commercial in any way. And it seems to me that it is it's going to be a house that is going to be rehabilitated so that it's going to maintain the appearance of a residence. It's going to be operated as a large family residence. And to me, that is the kind of low-intensity, mixed-use environment that the purpose of the transitional zone references.
So if I looked at this as a mixture of, because you mentioned administrative staff and you'd mentioned clinicians, some of whom will not be living there, but that will be visiting there, correct? There'll be a nurse on call?
None of the adult staff live there.
None of the adults will live there, correct, all right. So if I look at that as, in one sense, administrative/office, and say to myself, all right, that mixes with the 12 client residents who will reside there, I come up with a mixed use. Is that a fair reading of what you're saying?
I didn't think that was the mixture of the use.
That's
I
what
mean,
I'm seeing.
Yeah, I don't see it that way. I mean, the
How am I wrong? Or does it matter to you?
well, the mixed use that I think that this is talking about is it's not the mixture within the building, but is the type of use that mixes with the neighborhood. So, I mean, I think it's just a perspective on what is being mixed from your question to what my view is. I'm not sure it matters.
I'm not sure it does either.
When I think of a mixed use from a zoning standpoint, I'm thinking of the storefront on the first floor with the apartment on the second floor.
That's
or
sort of where I was
the
coming from.
doctor's office where the doctor lives in the unit above or below or out back. Mixed meaning two separate uses. That's sort of the intent in my mind of how you would define a mixed use is two separate uses that are allowed in the zone coming together under one roof. Here, in my view, we have one use. It's a boarding house.
It is not a boarding house.
A group home, I
Yeah,
apologize,
it's
yeah.
definitely not a boarding house.
Right, a group home, yes.
Far from
So it's a group home, but then on the second hand, you're saying that it's a family, a single-family residence, but by definition in zoning, 4 unrelated guests are the maximum limit that you can have in a single dwelling unit, so you can't really construe this as a single-family dwelling unit. I understand what you're trying to articulate is that these kids come together and they have sort of parental structure and whatnot, and it's a family in that sense. But it's not a single-family home being mixed as a group home. It's a group home, one use, not a mixed use. That's my opinion.
It's not a mixed use, and I don't think it was ever indicated to be a mixed use, and I don't think that the purpose of the transitional zoning district is referring to mixed uses in the way that you're characterizing them. It doesn't say mixed uses like the building next to me that had offices and I think some worship activities and some residences. Those are all internal mixtures. If you look at this, it says low-intensity uses in a mixed-use environment. I consider the word environment to be the mixture of uses within the environment, i.e. the neighborhood.
Okay.
If I could add to that, the following phrase, which you didn't quote, and I'm surprised, goes as follows: of attached and detached structures. That would seem to me to encompass the broader picture of the neighborhood. Do you see what I'm reading?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I don't disagree.
Okay.
So in other words, I don't think that this has to be a mixed use in the standard way that you're interpreting it to be consistent with the
I understand what you're saying. It's
Zoning.
your view that the intent of the zoning is to call simply for a mixed number of uses within the neighborhood.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. And when I don't think you're disagreeing with me. When I've said that it's a family, I didn't indicate that it is a family as defined by the zoning ordinance. I just said it's going to have the impact of a large family of teenagers without cars.
Yes, specifically, you said it was a single-family home without cars, right? It would be a single-family home.
If I said it was a single-family home without cars, that was not my intention to say that. I said it's going to have the
Effect.
effect and the impact and the use as if it were a single-family, a large single-family, no doubt, without vehicles.
Understood. Thank you.
If I could.
Attorney Halpern?
Yes, Mr. Hanna, you didn't really spend too much time on the values of surrounding properties and the impact of this variance request on that. And I was wondering specifically if your meeting on September 1st with the neighbors generated any comments about that particular criterion that we have to deal with. And if so, would you like to share that?
I have to ask you, I don't think that was.
I don't remember any comments specific to that. I think we had spoken pretty extensively about the repair and maintenance that we plan to do to the facility in order to make it a nicer thing within the community. But I don't remember any specific questions about devaluing property within the area. Although, as he mentioned, it was a long meeting and a lot of questions, so.
Okay.
Is it your stance, though, that these vast improvements would undoubtedly lead to a value increase of that residence and quite probably surrounding?
That is my view.
Yeah, great.
Because the negative context of group homes are not something that I think the neighborhood needs to worry about in this case because of the heavy level of staffing as well as the quality of the educational quality of the staffing. 24/7 and in a residence that's going to be restored and be maintained in a very much better way than it is now. Does that
Anyone
help,
else?
Joe?
Yes, thank you. I'm all set for the moment. I'll yield to the other members.
Not seeing any more questions, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the
As
details.
always, I reserve the right to come back here?
Absolutely, yep. We will hear now from the public and offer you rebuttal. Thank you. So at this point, I am going to call on the public, and I'll begin with opposition to the application. And I do ask that, we do have a full agenda tonight, and just try to avoid being redundant, but still make opportunity to get your point across. And do introduce yourself by name and address.
I'm Mr. Chairman, I'm Anthony Tremblay. I live at 67 Summer Street. It's probably not necessary to remind the board that this area of Summer Street and School Street constitutes what might be the most historic neighborhood, one of the most historic neighborhoods, certainly in the city. This house, as you may know, was once the home of J.A. French, the famous 19th century photographer. The house across the street, which is currently being renovated, was built by James Scully Taft, the founder of Hampshire Pottery. So this is a neighborhood that has a lot of history in it. But we should also remember that the former office district was an attempt by the city's former zoning planners to preserve this important historical and residential district and its architectural integrity by allowing the apartments that were to be incorporated into some of these large properties, and by codifying the use, small home offices, that had actually crept into the neighborhood during the 50s and 60s, into this area, doctors, lawyers, and other professionals with in-home offices. And that's been what the office district essentially has been for 35, 45 years. This community has been through an extensive, multi-year public process, as you're all part of it, updating the zoning ordinance. And during this process, many new uses were proposed as newly permitted uses in what was the old office district, now called the Downtown Transitional Zone. Residents and property owners on Summer and School Street participated in a lot of these meetings. I did, my wife and I did. And large group homes were a major concern, very troublesome to many of us, regardless of the population served, the notion, the concept of large group homes. Nevertheless, once the dust settled, nearly a dozen new uses were permitted in the downtown transitional zone that had not been previously permitted in the office district. Large group homes were not included. Small group homes are allowed only by a conditional use permit. Large group homes not allowed, except as we're discussing tonight, by variance and CUP. And I think that the fact that all these new permitted uses were introduced into the district defines what a mixed use is meant by what the term mixed use means in the terms of the zoning ordinance itself. Despite the assertion by the petitioner that allowing a large group home in the district would not measurably impact the neighborhood, in fact, granting this variance could, and I believe will, open the door to other high-impact changes that could be visited on the property owners in the area, and that are not intended for this district as detailed in the new zoning ordinance itself. To the city, this is a zoning district, but to those of us who live on these streets, on these blocks, it's a neighborhood. There are on the street 4 single-family houses, as you heard, and a mixture of other residential options. And one of the most notable developments in the neighborhood over the last 3 or 4 years has been an increasing number of younger families moving into the area, whether it's on Summer Street, School Street, and some of the other area streets, surrounding streets. This is something we older residents applaud, I think. And in fact, my wife and I enjoy the fact that the elementary school bus now picks up the kids and drops them off right on the corner where we live. We love that. But so it's not a question of kids in the neighborhood. It's not a question of what kind of kids in the neighborhood. It's an issue of granting a variance in this brand new district newly defined district, let's call it, for a large group home that is of concern to many of us. The large group home, we don't need to repeat what has been proposed, 12 teenagers. However, I would like to emphasize a number of points. I should say that I prepared these remarks with the application in hand, not the conditions of approval that were presented to you today. And you yourselves have raised the question of whether the board itself could accept the suggestion of not allowing a variance to continue beyond the life of to not travel with the property should it be subsequently sold. But the large group home could accommodate up to 16 residents, even though now they're talking 12. That doesn't mean a new administration or pressure from the state wouldn't encourage them to consider trying to increase it. Under normal operating situations, the variance, once granted with the property, would travel with the property should it be sold. So if the state backs out, or if the home backs out, I'm not sure exactly where that leaves us. But what is perhaps more of concern is what happens while the home is in operation. It's an example of a large group home being allowed in a transitional, in the transitional zone via a variance. And that opens the door to more requests and more of changes that were not envisioned in the final version of the zoning ordinance. These are early days in the implementation of the new zoning ordinance, and following this, all of these interactions, we in the neighborhood are just beginning to live with the consequences of it. So the very first major thing to come up, as far as I'm aware, in the neighborhood since the new zoning ordinance has come into being is this request for a variance. And so we haven't even seen what the impact of all of these new permitted uses is apt to be in the neighborhood. I want to take exception with a couple of the assertions that were in the petitioner's request and have been talked about tonight. The petition calls this a low-intensity use of this building, and it compares the Unity House to other uses in the area, two apartments, 3 apartments, and so on. But comparing a situation where people work in offices or live in confined apartments within larger buildings is not the same as, people in an office aren't there 24/7. They come in, they're there during the workday, et cetera, et cetera. While the inside of this building may meet the physical needs of the Home for Little Wanderers, there's virtually no outdoor space. There's the porch, as Tom said, the porch and the little area in the back. And so that there's very little space for a dozen teenagers to move outside the building. And so that's of concern. The petition further attempts to equate the large group home's impact to the impact of all those current uses, as I said. And I submit this statement actually ignores the actual impact of those uses on the buildings in which they're situated in the neighborhood. The tourism agency, the doctor's offices, they produce very limited traffic, even less since COVID and the work-at-home movement, if you want to call it that, has kind of taken hold. All of these produce, but a facility with housing 12 teenagers in need of residential care and varying types of therapeutic interventions, along with the various 24-hour staff and the various hourly service providers needed, will have, I can't believe that it will have the kind of minimal impact that this petition envisions, or the minimal traffic and commotion and disruption in the neighborhood claimed in the petition. The petition asserts that the granting of the variance will not negatively impact the public or the neighborhood, and that failing to grant the variance would, quote, disproportionately burden the petitioners. However, after more than 5 years of consideration, multiple public hearings and more involvement by the city boards and the planners, the city enacted a zoning ordinance that provides by right the establishment of large group homes in 5 separate districts, zoning districts. While some of these districts may be largely commercial, as far as I'm aware, every one of them contains housing, various types of housing stock, including large buildings. And because of the compact nature of the city, establishing group homes in any of those 5 areas, with the possible exception, you might argue, of the one area out in West Keene, would not leave the residents very far removed from any of the amenities that the petition mentions, the library, the rail trail, et cetera, et cetera. What about the impact on property values in the neighborhood? Despite planned renovations and improvements to the building exterior, the petition cannot reasonably assert that having a large group home on a street as small as Summer Street, or any type of large group home on the street, will have no impact on surrounding property values. It is the concept, the public conception of a large group home itself being in the mix, along with apartments and single-family residences and small offices, that will impact property values. This is an unfortunate reality, given the need for this type of living arrangement. But simply saying that keeping the place painted and the shrubs trimmed will protect surrounding properties and preserve their value is a statement that I don't think can be proven, except perhaps over time, after such a variance is granted and we see what happens. That's a chance I hope this board will not take by granting this variance. Finally comes the issue of unnecessary hardship. There is no assertion being made in the application that this building cannot be used as the ordinance states, in strict conformance with the ordinance, quote unquote, since it's already being used in strict conformance with the ordinance, with both whether it's the old ordinance or the new one. Further, the petition does not successfully argue that Unity House, that quote, Unity House will have similar impacts to a 2-family or a 3-family dwelling, simply because it ignores the real dynamic of having a single housing unit as a residential facility with 12 teenagers and staff. With or without strict supervision, there's a different lifestyle dynamic in any large group home that must be acknowledged. In an apartment, in a 3-apartment building, those apartments are compartmentalized. The way that the residents interact with one another are controlled by that structure. The petition quotes the zoning ordinance, noting that the intent of the downtown transitional district is to, quote, accommodate, we've heard this before tonight, accommodate a variety of low-intensity uses in the mixed-use environment. I find the assertion that the Unity House constitutes a low-intensity use of the property is to be unsupportable by the likely reality of life in the Unity House for its residents. And finally, I don't believe that, as the petitioner asserts, that the use of 39 Summer Street to house Unity House equates to any of the other low-density, low-intensity uses, not no density, but low-intensity uses currently in place anywhere on Summer Street. And I challenge that notion, as petitioner asserts, because Unity House will operate like a single-family dwelling. It will have, quote, commensurate or lesser impact, I find that very hard to believe, than the other uses currently found in the neighboring buildings on Summer Street. If you live on Summer Street, as my wife and I do, you know from experiencing life on this street and in this neighborhood how truly low intensity virtually all the current uses in those buildings actually are. A large group home, in our opinion, simply does not fit. Thank you very much.
Any questions? Thank you. I'll call on anyone else in the audience at this point that is opposed to this application to come on up.
Stephen Bragdon. I live at 51 Railroad Street. My office abuts the north portion of this lot. And first of all, I'd like to say that I'm very impressed by the organization. I think they do good work. I think their purposes are well-meaning. What they want to do in that zone is probably the best that could be done with this type of development, but I don't think it's appropriate. And first of all, a couple of probably minor things. One of the problems was allowing submission of paperwork to the board at the last minute is that the public doesn't get to see it. And I don't know what's in there. It may well be nothing relevant, but I think it's a bad precedent to allow that to occur. Because again, the public doesn't get a chance to see it before the hearing is over. Two, there's been some allegations that that the city is somehow discriminating against large group homes. I can certainly see Attorney Hanna's argument. On the other hand, I don't think it's would be upheld in any court, as the city has provided many areas where large group homes could be located. Also, there was some allegations by citing a statute that if this was a government use, you'd have to allow it, and it's almost a government use. Well, no, it's not the government. It's a private, albeit nonprofit, company that wants to do this. So again, I think those two arguments really are a waste of time. And I think the previous speaker really hit on the main point, which is that the petitioner continues to argue about this being a low-intensity use. It's not a low-intensity use. It's not similar to any other use that's in that area, no matter how hard the petitioner would argue it. There are offices, there's residents, but there's not a large group home. And to allow a large group home in that area, as the previous speaker said, would open this up to other large uses that could petition after and rely on that precedent. Further, there's the argument that this lot is somehow dissimilar from other lots in the area, and it's the second largest lot on that side of the street, I don't think is relevant. The other houses and lots in this area are similar to this home. They're not exactly the same. I'm not saying they're 7,000 feet, although there are some houses there that are quite large, and my office is 6,000 feet. On the other hand, the fact that it's large does not mean it can't be used for some of the many uses that are allowed in that area. And so I'd say it does not meet the criteria of there being any hardship there at all. There's nothing unique to that lot that isn't similar to other lots in the area. And I think that's it.
Thank you, Steve. Any questions?
Nope.
Thank you. Next up, anyone in opposition? Come on up, sir, and speak your name and address before you begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Mike Forrest. I am president of the Board of Directors of the Keene Senior Center, which is within the distance to being notified of this petition. And I'll be very brief because some of the points that I feel are relevant here. For one thing, the spirit of the ordinance is for mixed low-intense uses. And 12 residents is not low-intense. And I believe on page 3, there is the statement, would operate similar to a single household unit. I've never seen a single household unit with 12 teenagers. It's just too intense for that area. And I think the hardship issue, it states, owing to special conditions of the property, what they're looking for is a use variance. The property is not that much different from many of the properties on Summer Street. I just don't see that this is going to work there. And I will add my comment to, I think, more material that was submitted, I think stated last Thursday, and some material submitted tonight that nobody else has seen, I think is wrong. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? I am going to take 1 minute just because it's been brought up twice. The information that was submitted today actually was read into the minutes by Attorney Hanna. That was the conditions of approval, just so the public can be aware that you have been completely familiarized with that. The other piece of paper that he submitted today was the email from the listing agent, which he went into great depths about, just so the public can also be aware of that. At this point, I will call on the next public commentary, who is opposed to.
I don't know which one to take. Hello, members of the ZBA. My name is Jean Ann Farah, and I live, thank you. And I have lived at 59 School Street. I won't tell you how many years, but I've lived in this neighborhood for most of my life. And that includes 39 Summer Street, where I lived in my family home for 10 years. 39 Summer Street is a very historical home in the middle of a lovely historic neighborhood. We now have young families moving in, and in fact, some of them directly abut the property requesting the variance. This house is in the downtown transitional zone. This ordinance exists to protect a neighborhood from the impact of business activities which would be incompatible with the nature of the neighborhood. The proposed variance certainly does not comply with the spirit of this ordinance. The point is they will be installing a home for a dozen teenage boys and girls ages 14 to 18 who are low risk and LGBTQ. And then we have the staff. This right next to family homes with children. This house once had an incredible architectural interior, which they plan to renovate to accommodate this usage. The house is on a narrow lot closely abutting the properties on either side. The back of the house was once a yard, and it is now mostly a parking lot. This variance does seem contrary to the public interest and inappropriate to be placed in this area. If the variance is granted, it is probable that the entire neighborhood will be affected in a negative manner. Denying the variance petition will not create any unnecessary hardship because the primary requirement for this company is square footage. And incidentally, I do have a question whether the square footage includes the other part of the property which houses offices and It did have an apartment over it, not when we lived there, but it was added when the nursing home was put there. They need another large building, and it would be wonderful if they had an area with space for kids this age to do things that were purposeful and taught them responsibility and engage in activities that would teach them things like growing gardens and learning about agriculture or caring for pets. It seems strange that there is apparently an impediment to them putting these kinds of homes in outlying areas instead of putting them in the city where the risk area on them is so much higher. I don't understand that law, but then I don't understand a lot of laws. Finally, the company requesting the variance is based in Boston, as we know, and will be under main contract with the state of New Hampshire. This is really big business, not a buffer that fits nicely into one of the most important, loveliest neighborhoods in Keene. I sincerely request that you deny this petition, and I thank you so much for hearing our concerns. Good
Thank you.
evening. You can turn that off.
Any questions? Thank you. Next up in opposition.
My name is Tom Savastano, and I live at 75 Winter Street within the downtown transition zone and 2 blocks from the property in question. My concerns arise as a result of my extensive involvement with the city's downtown zoning changes to the Land Development Code over the past 3 years, and how any changes to the zoning through variances will affect my property in the future. Over the past 3 years, the city's worked hard to carefully update its Land Development Code and downtown zoning. What was arrived at came through much give and take and compromise, and as I heard the mayor say shortly afterwards, was one of the most important processes the city has undertaken in 20-plus years. I entered into the process because of my concerns about the downtown transition zone in which I live, formerly known as the office zone. It has been a low-intensity buffer zone between downtown and residential zones, mostly with single-family homes, multifamily, and offices. Low intensity is a key description of the zone, and some of the most involved discussion that happened over the past 3 years regarding this zone was how that term would be honored and followed in the new zoning. Relatively early on in the process, the possibility of various social service usages was raised for the zone. Group homes were proposed with various maximum residents. An example of the discussion at that time at a joint planning board, planning licensing development committee meeting on August 10, 2020, an example of the discussion included the following quote. Councillor Clark noted congregate living as a high-density use. He added, by placing high-density uses in lower-density districts, it reduces property values. Ongoing discussion took place over the next months. During the September 14, 2020 meeting, former senior planner Tara Kessler, quote, reviewed with the committee public comment received from July 13 through September 10th, including the following entry, quote, concern for the number of residents that are permitted to reside in a group home or lodging house and the impact that increased density would have on these zoning districts. In the draft, there's a cap of 16 for group homes and no cap on lodging houses. One letter suggests that group home and lodging house uses should be capped at no more than 5 unrelated persons in these districts. Interest in the removal of these uses from these districts, just a list of the things that were raised. Concern for array of negative impacts that these might have on a neighborhood, including increased density, overcrowding, traffic, noise, overflow parking, public safety, reduced property standards, and the decrease of property values. After citing these concerns, Ms. Kessler stated that based on the feedback received, for group homes, staff suggest breaking it into 2 categories, small and large. Small group homes, 8 or fewer non-related people, be allowed in medium district, downtown transition, and office district. At the time, the office district was still called that before it became the downtown district. It was city staff itself that suggested this delineation of small group homes and large group homes, and assigned the small group homes to the downtown transition district. Personally, I found this an equitable compromise. In the November 9, 2020 joint Planning Board, Planning License Development Committee meeting, Ms. Kessler noted, zoning is a tool, this is a quote, zoning is a tool used by communities to protect property rights and prevent against nuisances by making sure uses that are located near each other are compatible and the size and placement of buildings are appropriate for the areas they are located. She went on and said, if a use is not listed as being permitted in that district, it would not be allowed to occur as the principal use of a lot. So this is a request for a variance for, a use that's not permitted, according to the long drawn-out process of the past 3 years. My point to the Zoning Board of Appeals is the following. After more than 3 years now of discussion, debate, and compromise about zoning in the downtown transition zone, and a compromise proposed by the city itself, allowing small group homes with up to 8 people with CUP, why is this request for variance coming forward? This has been, as Mr. Tremblay said, this has been under consideration for a long time, a lot of compromise, a lot of give and take. I wanted to point out something too with regards to this. The Attorney Hanna mentioned the points about the FHA and whether there would be problems in terms of the zoning with that, or in terms of the group home delineation. I have here a notes from the December 14 joint PB-PLD meeting, and she said, Ms. Kessler said, the notes say, she noted at the last meeting there were a number of comments from the public regarding congregate living and social service uses, and there was a question raised as to whether the proposed ordinances would be in compliance with the Federal Fair Housing Act. While staff considered the requirements of this act in their development of the proposed ordinances, so they were considered, they have reached out to the consulting firm Camiros, who has experience working with cities on congregate living and social service ordinances, for their professional opinion on how the proposed ordinances align with their understanding of the Fair Housing Act and their knowledge of how other communities have implemented regulations around congregate living. Staff is also consulting with the city attorney and will follow up with the joint committee on this item in January. When the January meeting came, in the notes from the meeting, the minutes, Ms. Kessler referred back to the memo from Camiros discussed earlier. It had been earlier referenced, but it hadn't been fully discussed. There were some interruptions. What Camiros noted in this memo is how the city is differentiating group home from single-family home is consistent with what other communities are doing and being in compliance with the Fair Housing Act. Later on in that meeting, in the minutes state, Ms. Kessler noted that the reason for creating these categories of group home was to provide opportunity of group homes of various sizes to be permitted in Keene, while addressing concerns that larger group homes would not be consistent with certain zoning districts that are promoting lower density development. So my point is that consultation happened with a professional consulting firm and also with the city attorney at the time, and the determination was made to go ahead with the zoning as it is today, delineation between small and large group homes. So I don't want to return to any points really that other people have made too much. I will say that in terms of the variance criteria, just a couple of extra points. In reading it, I felt that the variance request assumed the best case scenarios overall for the operation of this group home. For example, traffic estimates assume no vehicle usage connected to the resident teams, except for that provided by staff. But what about visitors of residents? The residents could be anywhere from 12 to 18 plus in age. Are the staff not going to permit friends to drive up to the building to visit or go out somewhere together? So I don't really feel that, I feel like the best case scenarios have been presented, but there's a potential for a lot more traffic, a lot more. And I'll also add to that the estimates of traffic take no account for need of emergency services. The issue of some previous issues with the Home for Little Wanderers were brought up. These are disturbing. They're relatively available on any Google search. According to a nonprofit, Live Boston 617, that supports the first responder community in the Boston area. This was about, I think, a situation in Boston itself in October 16, 2020. They had an entry saying, entitled, "Serious Questions Raised About Home for Little Wanderers After Child in Their Care Found Stabbed." And the article in this website said the Children's Runaway Shelter is a constant hotspot for problems with staff seemingly incompetent at managing these troublesome children, with kids constantly being reported as runaways, usually hours and hours after the last time they were seen. For example, this child was last seen at 11:30 p.m. or so, but not reported lost until after she had been stabbed. With regards to, that was, I think, with regards to Boston. With regards to Walpole in 2020, WBZ News Radio reported that Walpole's chief of police has called on the State Department of Early Education and Care to take corrective action against the Home for Little Wanderers in Walpole. It goes on, this news entry says that police have been called to the home more than 200 times this year for runaways, assaults, and emotional disturbances, with some kids even jumping out of second-floor windows. This story was also reported by Boston 25 News in December 2020, which added that attorney Greg Corbo is representing the town of Walpole. He said a young girl of 16 was missing for 24 days. She was found in a short-term rental in Boston where she was sexually abused by numerous men. Chief Carmichael from Walpole PD said the situations that we've been experiencing, we just can't ensure their safety. They're just not safe under the conditions they're in. On that Tuesday evening, I guess before this report, before this news report, Walpole held its Board of Health meeting. Health officials have ordered a cease and desist order. Corbo, the town attorney, said the facilities in Walpole shut down and that the residents be relocated immediately. These experiences of other communities clearly undermine the credibility of the variance request's conclusion that, quote, the home has substantial experience with group homes generally. It is based on this experience that the home could confidently say that the impact of this proposed group home on Keene's emergency response services, e.g. fire, EMS, and police, will be minimal. I would just state that to avoid negligence, the city of Keene needs to do its due diligence to examine these issues carefully. My personal recommendation would be to deny the variance. I mean, to deny the variance. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the public that wishes to speak against this, please come up. I do know that everyone wants a chance to speak, and I certainly can appreciate that, but just in light of what we're up against here, if we could, not saying that anyone has been redundant, but if we could just stay on that theme, it's much appreciated. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Jody Leach, 37 Middle Street, also 24 Summer Street, it's on the corner. I'll keep it brief. I'm not a very eloquent person, and I appreciate everyone that's come before me. They've said things I wouldn't even have thought of, and I appreciate what they did for research, and I appreciate the petition as well and what they're trying to accomplish. I've raised my 3 daughters there. Now I have my mother-in-law with me, so that's what I'm using it for, to live. And as I hear what they're talking about, again, I'm not a smart man. I'm just a carpenter, not a very good one. So I'll do the best I can just to get my point across. I appreciate what you're doing, and I would hope that if they're within compliance, like I have to be in compliance when I go to the board, then I guess I should just live with what they're looking to do. If what they're asking to do is a variance, it's not in compliance with current use, I would ask that you would not allow that. I need people like you who know what you're reading, know the laws and ordinances that we've passed. I'm not that great at that. So if that's the case and what everyone before me has said is true in opposition, I would hope that you would uphold that for guys like me who really can't get through the minutia of it, to be honest with you. So I appreciate your time and everything that's going on here, and that we don't have to be enemies if we disagree, but I hope you will listen to those that came before me who are very eloquent, because I'm certainly not. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone who cares to come up next in dissent to the application?
I'm Richard Emmett. I live at 99 School Street. My backyard abuts the larger parking lot that's extending back behind this home. I'm pretty new to Keene. I've just been here 3 years, but I just wanted to put in my 2 cents from what I've heard tonight. I came here with an open mind. I have a lot of respect for the Little Wanderers. I applaud the objective, but I just don't think that this is the location. The idea that this home would be a low-intensity use is just not credible to me. 12 teenagers is a lot of teenagers, and it's my judgment that it would change the character of the neighborhood, and I'm a little fearful of that. As far as the the new zoning regulations, I know you guys have put a tremendous amount of work into that the past 3 years. I've been tracking that. Tony and I have been talking about it. We're next door neighbors. I think you did a really good job with it. So these new regs have just been put in place, much effort and much thought. I don't see why we would throw this out now. I think not allowing large group homes in this neighborhood is the right answer. I think it was a well-considered answer by the city of Keene, and I would respectfully ask you guys to uphold that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Up next, opposed to?
Hi, I'm Susan Doyle. I'll use 69 Island Street as my address. I'm here because Megan and John Aruda are the neighbors, 239. They're in the white building to the east side. Can you hear me? Okay. And I told the neighbors the other night that they are very excited about moving here. The library's down the street. They did get married in Harrisville, even though they live down by the Cape now. They're excited about moving here, and they have 2 toddlers. And John, the dad, is he's out at sea. He goes out for 75 days at a time. So he somehow reached out to me and said, "Can you go to these meetings because we cannot be here?" One thing, so he's, of course, and his wife are concerned about having the teenagers next door and their little boys, which I can understand. And I guess if Little Wanderers is interested in putting up a fence or big trees, I'm not sure how that gets enforced if this comes to fruition. The other thing I was going to say is that a lot of us grew up with, 4, 5, 6 brothers and sisters in little houses, 1 bathroom, and we're okay. We have jobs. We're professional people. We've turned out okay, and so I'm not sure that the Little Wanderers people have to really feel that having a really, a beautiful Victorian that's been renovated is going to change the lives of these young people, because I think it's all about the staff that works there and the care that they extend to the teenagers. That's what's going to make these young people better make their lives better, not the fact that they're living in a fancy house and that they're going to get turned out to the world and probably live in a little apartment. So, that's kind of a reality check. So I would appreciate it if the board would consider not giving this variance. Thanks.
Thank you, Susan. Any questions? All right, whoever is next, come on up.
Good evening. My name is Damian Wasserbauer. I live at 45 Summer Street. I abut the property. I have personal experience with and a soft spot for orphanages, juvenile homes, and from personal family experience. I think it's a good thing to have them in the downtown area, not only for the community, but for other things. But in this case, it's about a variance. And from what I've heard, and I have no opposition to people being next to me and running this type of facility, but I do think that my neighbors, and I'm new to the community, have been there a year and a half. And they've participated in this process, and there has been a compromise. I do think that juvenile homes, orphanages could live on our street and cater to anybody under 18. I do think the limit of 8 seems to be a reasonable compromise. I don't know the position, or I think I heard the position of the Home for Little Wanderers on why they need the variance. And it was because it didn't make economic sense. I think that's just a corporate type of, it has to make economic sense for that institution. So maybe this isn't the right spot, but I do think that we could have a foster home or whatever it may be on our street to blend in. But I do agree with my neighbors that the size is something that had to be compromised. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up. Seeing no one else coming, would you like to come up, sir? Come on up.
Frank DePippo, 33 Center Street, Keene. I have a number of concerns. There appears to be, if this were approved for any reason, there appears to be a lack of staffing, particularly in the evening. There's no mention of provision of any security or police services. I don't know if a threat assessment was conducted for the safety of the neighbors and the residents at a time where people are attacking synagogues, mosques, and other specialty areas. This could possibly be an area of threat, so a threat assessment should be conducted. Because of the residents, some deranged person could have an interest in doing harm only because of the nature of the residents. So a threat assessment can be conducted by the local police, sheriffs, or the Joint Terrorism Task Force, whether there are groups in the area that where I have no specialized knowledge of any threats. It's something to consider. If this were approved, and the city staffers would know this, whether in the improvements, I would recommend that all of the fire suppression and alarm systems be changed out to state-of-the-art, where you have a number of young children, although there is a requirement that they do not smoke. That often isn't followed. So if all these upgrades are being made to the paint and other areas, I would recommend, and the city staff might be able to answer that, where they are putting in all these permits, that the fire suppression and alarm and also security systems should be implemented, excuse me, sorry. I don't know if the city staff knows that as part of the improvements.
That would be part of the permitting process for this, if this application were granted and then it went further on through the planning process, the permitting process for the building construction would likely dictate that fire codes get brought up to snuff. That's typical of a change of use. Any change of use, you have to adhere to the applicable codes.
I see. And this seems to be an expansion of use. And at the beginning of the meeting, I missed, you had said in regard to 2729 Center Street, where they're converting that to a three-family from a single family without parking. Could you just tell me when that hearing is?
I absolutely
Been continued to?
Yes, that's been continued to October 3rd, 6:30 PM. Same place.
Okay. So I'm not objecting necessarily to the group home, but I don't think enough information has been provided, in particular where they're cutting back the staffing at night instead of increasing it. There's no indication of security or police services. If this were granted, I would ask that that the sponsor of the group home be required to provide any police or security services that are needed in the event there are any problems at the site from any outside people. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Who wishes to come up next? Go in opposition first, and if we do get through the opposition, I'll be calling on people in support of as well. Michael? Oh, absolutely. Apparently, we need to take a brief recess. I was holding it, but since Michael has to go, I'm going to go too. To ruin the social hour, but I think we should get back to business.
All passes over.
Yep. Thank you, everyone, for the recess, and we'll pick right back up where we left off, which was calling on people for public opposition. Did appear as though we were running out of folks who wish to speak in opposition to, so at this point, if that's correct, I will call on people who are in favor of. So if there's anyone in favor of this application that wishes to speak, come on up.
Good evening. My name is Robert Drum, and I'm the owner and operator of Alexander and Roberts at 53 Summer Street. We're a 75-year-old international travel company, and we moved into 53 Summer Street. We purchased the building, a shareholder and myself, in 1995. So we've been there 27 years. And when we moved into the building, it had had several lives. It had been a nursing home. It had been an apartment building. It had been a doctor's office. Actually, in 1799, when it was built by a Dr. Blood. I discovered him because when we took down a wall to create a conference room, there was a quill letter that he wrote to a patient asking that he be paid. So these houses have gone through many lives. And over the period of time that's transpired, these houses serve different purposes. As neighborhoods evolve, as populations change, as technology changes. And I think that's the case very much with what we're seeing at 39 Summer Street. We share a driveway with them. They have a right-of-way with us. And when we moved in, I noticed from my neighbors, who probably won't talk to me after this, but I did notice from my neighbors a lot of questions because we're a tour operator. That's what we do. We don't have visitors come. We're not a travel agent, but we develop tours for AAA. We did for Pan Am, Delta Airlines. And we were looking for a house rather than an office because we work overseas. And our visitors, our business partners around the world would come to Keene and this pristine community and were delighted with it because they had never seen this part of America before. They might have been to Boston, certainly New York, LA, Chicago. So this particular building in terrible repair was appealing to us because of the heritage it suggested. I believe that the Home for Little Wanderers has a similar vision for their property at 39 Summer Street. I think they're interested in providing a warm and welcoming environment for kids who are sorely in need of this support. And I really do congratulate the state of New Hampshire for reaching out to them. In 1960, I was 11 years old, and my church group went to visit the Home of Little Wanderers so that we as young kids could begin to understand how fortunate we were in our family environments compared to these kids. And they've really developed into one of the premier social service agencies in the country. And I think the community and the city of Keene would be blessed by the fact that they have such a professional, sophisticated, well-experienced organization behind the home that they propose to establish here. So I would like to say that I am in support of the variance. I understand how difficult it is to come to these rules that cities have to live by, communities have to live by. But you guys exist because variances are a part of life. And people can come to you with a different set of needs, a different set of circumstances, and I think that's to be applauded. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I have one question. We've heard a lot about the impact of this proposed use. What is your opinion on what you think the impact will be of 12 resident client teenagers living at this property?
Well, you know, I think about a movie that was popular in the 1950s. Maybe you've seen it, Cheaper by the Dozen, that took place in Montclair, New Jersey, in a Victorian house, very much like this particular house, and the family of 12 kids that grew up there. And it was pretty tumultuous, but usually within the four walls of the building. And so I think there may be some adjustment issues, for sure, but I think it's worth it. And I think our neighborhood, I actually live on School Street as well. My personal residence is on School Street. And I think the neighborhood could stand it. The younger people coming in have a different sense of family than do prior generations. There is probably not a family that I know of that either could afford to redo this property or would be comfortable living in such a large space. And I've renovated many houses for my own personal use, so I understand how difficult that process is. And this could be the best purpose for this property. And certainly, with the little wanderers guiding the way, I think that we should feel much more comfortable about what the future holds and the success that this could be. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak in favor of, please come on up. Okay, at this point, it does appear as though we have heard from the public, so I will call on Attorney Hannah to come back up for rebuttal.
So I won't do the lawyer things because I don't really know about those, but I'll give you a couple of things that are more kid-related, whatnot. So first, to the point of why 12 and not 8. It was not the Home for Little Wanderers that requested 12. It was not our financial considerations that brought us to 12. It was the state of New Hampshire that requested 12, because it is significantly more financially advantageous for New Hampshire to operate group homes at 12 when you have 1-to-4 and 1-to-6 ratios. The number that comes together on those is 12. And so the state has formulas that they use to calculate what the per cost per resident is, and they want that number to come in at a rate that the state can afford to continue to pay. An 8-bed group home is about a quarter to a third more expensive for the state of New Hampshire to fund. And so they want numbers that are able to be well-funded, but also able to be operated well. And it's not about our need for a certain size. We operate some group homes in Mass that are 7, and we operate some groups in Mass that are significantly bigger than that. It's really more about what the state of New Hampshire can afford and keeping the cost down for the state than it is about us. So that's one. On the incidents that were mentioned, just to give a little bit more context to some of those. The child that was referred to that was trafficked, that child ran away while on a home visit, not while they were with us. While they were on that home visit, they left the home and unfortunately were trafficked by somebody. We had no way of managing, controlling, or supporting that activity. Chief Carmichael's assertion that somehow we had something to do with it was factually inaccurate, and again, I think goes to the relationship that we had with the previous chief of police in Walpole. I will say, the new chief of police, who's been there for about a year and some change, has a very different way of talking about the home and a very different way of talking about the services that we provide than the way Chief Carmichael did. To the point also of Walpole on the cease and desist, the cease and desist order was issued by the city of Walpole when we opened, at the request of the governor of Massachusetts, a COVID relief unit in March of 2020. This is when Massachusetts had just gone into a lockdown, when we were unable to get a hold of PPE, and when the state of Massachusetts was in a panic about what to do with positive COVID kids in group homes. The state of Massachusetts came to providers, asked providers who could come together to open one of those units, and the Home for Little Wanderers said, yes, we'll do it. We did it in 7 days. Normally, a group home takes anywhere from 6 months to a year to really get off the ground and open. We opened that unit in 7 days. We successfully ran it. In fact, we successfully ran it so well that the cease and desist order was removed by the city of Walpole because the state said, you can't put a cease and desist order in for this. This is a public health need. And we ran it so well that we were the last COVID positive unit operated for the state of Massachusetts because DCF believed that we were providing the best of all of the state's units. To the incident where the child was stabbed. This was a child who left one of our DMH-funded group homes in the city of Boston. DMH does not allow us to prevent children from leaving our programs if they want to. This is the Department of Mental Health, so this is not child protection. These are children who have mental health issues. DMH has very particular regulations around client rights. And this is a strictly no-hold program. So if a child wants to leave, they're all adolescents. We're not allowed to prevent them from doing that. While they were on the run and not at our program, while they were several towns away actually, they were stabbed while with a group of friends. That friend knew us well enough that they called our program and requested that we call EMS to get them help. That's the connection and the relationship and the care that we provide to our kids, that even their friends know that when they're in trouble, they call us and we will get them the health and care that they need.
Any questions? Great.
Just a couple things in response to some of the prior speakers. I think this board has heard it before and knows that the granting of a variance doesn't open up the floodgates, and that a variance is a safety valve established by the state, RSA 674-33, to provide relief where the standards for a variance are satisfied. And the fact that the variance is sought from an ordinance that was recently enacted versus one that's been in effect for 10 years does not change the fact that it may or may not be deserving. I did emphasize and did provide what I consider to be evidence about the sustainability of the current use, that it is not sustainable. I provided you information from the Realtor and information about the current activity being not at full 100% use. I testified earlier about the unlikelihood of multifamily housing being viable and cost-effective, and the same goes for single family. So I think there are hardship aspects, given the type and size of this building, that relate directly to the hardship issue. On the question of low intensity, I think we may be in a situation where the eyes of the beholder, a pretty subjective opinion. All I can say is that funeral homes and bed and breakfast, offices, multifamily housing are all permitted uses in this neighborhood and in this zoning district. There is an 11-unit apartment on the corner of Summer and Court. As you know, there's a highly active CPA firm with much more frontage on Summer than it has on Court that is an abutter. And there are a 3-unit apartment building immediately to the east of the subject property. So those are all uses that I would suggest to you are equal or more intense than the proposed use. In addition to the types of uses I just suggested, uses by special exceptions such as senior centers, community centers, cultural facilities, daycare are all permitted by special exception. As you know, that's not by variance, that's by permitted use, meeting the criteria enumerated in the ordinance.
I can give you an anecdotal thing to the high intensity. We had a new neighbor move in next door to Waltham House, the program that is the most comparable thing that I could talk to you about to this program. After a couple of months of being there, we had tried to reach out to them a few times. I decided to walk over and introduce myself because we just hadn't been able to connect with them. Knocked on the door, came in, introduced myself, explained what we were, and she says, you know, I thought it was funny that like everybody looked really different and that there were like a bunch of kids there, but I just figured you guys were like a big kind of strange family. And I said, well, you know, in many respects, actually, that's kind of what we are. And she's like, great, it's been nice meeting you. Like that's the level of impact we've had. And, you know, we have done this for a long time. This isn't something the home just started doing last week. We've operated these kind of programs for 200 years, and we do have a sense of the impact it has on the community. And we're not saying that it will have none. What we're saying is that the impact doesn't disproportionately affect the community, and that we think we can be good members of the neighborhood.
Any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. Guess at this point, I will close the public hearing. And the board can deliberate on the 5 criterion. John?
Just a little bit of housekeeping, maybe, if I may, Mr. Chair. Seeing that the clock is about ready to hit the 10 o'clock, and by this board's own rules, no new applications will be able to be opened after 10 o'clock. So just if there's anybody in the room that's here for the 310 Marlborough Street, those will not be heard tonight, both the variance and the special exception. They will be scheduled for the next meeting, which will be October 3rd at 6:30, and it will also be re-noticed. So just wanted to point that out if anybody's here for those 2 applications.
Thank you.
As a further housekeeping measure, going back to what John talked about earlier in the Fair Housing Act, I am of the view that I might find it useful to hear what Attorney Mullins has to say about that. That is not my general area. And I am also of the view that the applicants have presented a powerful case for the approval of this application, and I want that information in front of me. I would like to continue the deliberations until next time after we have Mullins' opinion, so we can cover that base.
Michael?
May I add to the list of questions that I would not mind seeing addressed?
The conditions.
Excuse me, your microphone?
He was so relieved he got the hall pass.
Yeah. Thought my voice was booming now. And that is some details about the practicability of the conditions of the agreement that had been drafted between the organization and the neighbors. I think some of those provisions are potentially important to talk about and to know.
And the legality.
Legal, yeah.
Yes, some of them I'd be quite comfortable incorporating, others not so much without some guidance, and some definitely not without some guidance. Attorney Taylor, do you have any input on this?
Well, I am in agreement with what's been said, so they said it first. I think it's important for us. I personally don't believe that there's a fair housing issue or a discrimination issue. But again, I don't know if that is the legal position that the city has taken, and I'd like to hear it. By
Fair
the
enough.
same token, I would also like to hear from the city attorney his perspective on limiting the time, the length of time or the specifics of a variance as opposed to running with the land, because my understanding is that it must run with the land. You can limit it in that regard, but it can't run with the property owner.
Right.
So I'd like to have the city attorney's view on that issue as well.
I would agree wholeheartedly, specifically on number 4. I know we can make, conditions to a variance, but not that I'm aware of, can we condition it to a property owner? Richard, in agreement?
Absolutely.
Okay. So with all of that said,
I think a motion is in
we
order.
need to make a motion, and I think it needs to be a motion to continue.
Yeah, I would move that we continue the deliberative portion of this public meeting to the next session. That's the public hearing being closed at this point. In order to request a legal opinion from City Attorney Tom Mullins on the subject of the conditions proposed by the applicant and the issue of the Fair Housing, the Federal Fair Standard Housing Act, or whatever it's called. I don't even know the name of it. I touch this area so infrequently that I'm not as certain as my colleague over here about its inapplicability. But those are the two general areas, and I wouldn't single out just condition number 4. I would ask him to look at all of it and let him tell us what jumps out at him as particularly troublesome or not troublesome at all. So that's really not part of the motion, that's my explanation, but I don't want to limit it to number 4 as opposed to number 8, 2, and 1 just thrown out there. So that's the long and short of the motion.
Attorney.
Can we make it clear in the motion that the opinion discuss also the discrimination in the Fair Housing Act, not just the conditions?
Yes, I thought,
Oh,
I was thought it was clear, yes, absolutely, the Fair Housing Act. I called it the wrong thing, but I'd like an opinion on that, too.
So we do have a motion on the floor here from Attorney Hoppick to continue this with further review from the city attorney relative to the Fair Housing Act as well as the conditions set forth for ZBA 22-15, and I will second that.
Excuse me.
I am going to,
Continue to the next meeting, continue to,
yeah, to October 3rd at 6:30 PM. Is that what you wanted, John? And then I am going to open the public hearing for 1 second just to take your question.
Thank you. Do I need to reintroduce myself?
Yes, please.
Anthony Tremblay. Sorry. Anthony Tremblay, 67 Summer Street. I just wanted understood the submitted sheet of conditions of approval were not drafted in consultation with the neighbors, but were in response to questions that were raised during the meeting that was the public meeting that was held last week.
I believe that to be the case, and certainly Attorney Hanna can confirm that, but that is what was read by Attorney Hanna and handed to us this evening. And it's just relative to those conditions,
Right.
yes. And those conditions were a result of neighborhood meetings, correct, Attorney Hanna?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
And Mr. Chair, if I could raise one more point?
But they were just, it wasn't as though these were put before anybody for their opinion. These were responses.
It is
questions
my
that were
understanding that the applicant, based on feedback from the neighborhood, in order to attempt to appease concerns or accommodate
Right.
concerns,
You're
drafted this list of conditions that they were willing to set forth upon themselves
Exactly.
for approval. With that said, the board now has to determine which ones we may or may not be able to legally input, as well as which ones we may prefer or prefer not to input.
Got it.
Thank you.
And one other thing, Mr. Chair, could city staff post those conditions on the website with with whatever the packet that goes with this case, so that everybody can look at them by next meeting?
Yes, the information that was submitted to the board members this evening, it can be added to the packet.
Yeah,
And
I
it
agree.
is available for anyone from the general public to come into the office to take a look at during regular business hours.
Let the record show that this public hearing is again closed, by the way, and also that we have a motion to continue, and we do need to vote on that. So all of those in favor? It is unanimous. We'll see you next month, folks. Thanks for all your patience, and thank you for the applicant behind you, too.
We get mayor next time.